Hi, I'm Stephen Witt. I am both the guest and the host here tonight. I'm the author of a book called How Music Got Free, which is the history of digital music piracy. I write a lot about the internet underground, the streaming economy, the MP3 economy, and the effects that it has both artistically and commercially on the music that we consume. So Lars invited me here to talk tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time in Copenhagen. It's my first time in Denmark. This is a wonderful place. I'm very happy to be here, and I just want to thank you all for coming. And I'll let Rasmus introduce himself.
So I'm the Danish aspect of this talk. I do research at the Rhythmic Music Conservatory and Roskilde University, specializing in music streaming and the digitalization of the music industries in more general. So that's kind of like the background that I come from.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll have a couple topics for debate, kind of go back and forth, and then if we want, we'll take any audience questions from anybody. But I think the big question that we were talking about beforehand is the effects of streaming on the artistic qualities of what we consume. You know, has the move away from albums and physical media toward, you know, these kind of digital streams had an effect on music, and if so, what is that effect? Rasmus, you said that music is not better or worse than it used to be, but it's definitely different. So maybe sort of answer that, and then I'll give my ideas.
And well, I think if we look at it from the aspect of what does digitalization do to music, it has democratized the production and distribution of music, and in that sense, people are free to do whatever they want. So you could say that in some sense, the musicians today are free from the proverbial shackles of the music industry. Mm-hmm. So they don't need to convince an A&R at a record label to invest time and money in putting them in a studio, getting a CD pressed, and pushing everything out. You can, if you do music and you don't have a record label supporting you, you can still pay a small fee, and then you have your music digitally available. So in that sense, it deliberates artists to kind of live out their artistic dreams, and in that sense, gives them the artistic autonomy back. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, some dreams and some of the things you might want as an artist cost money. If you want to record a symphony orchestra of strings on your recording, or you have that kind of wishes around your music, it can be harder to get it out there because of exactly the same things. You don't have a record label pushing big amounts of money into the music industry, right, and investing in developing new music. So it's kind of like on the one hand and on the other hand, I think we're getting more music, we're getting more different music now than we have ever had before, but we're not necessarily getting the kind of big investment productions that we used to.
Yeah, I think, and I'm kind of alone on this, but I think music is a lot worse than it used to be. I think there's been a real diminishment of ambition on the part of the artists. There was this funny thing that happened in the 60s, 50s, but especially the 60s, where it's kind of the left-wing counterculture collided with kind of big money music records. And so oddly, for a time, it was extremely profitable to be an ambassador of the left-wing cultural ambassador of the left-wing counterculture, and the values that they were spreading, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, kind of values of, like, you know, leaving behind tradition, individuality, kind of these kind of things that we actually now take for granted that we live in this world, but at the time they were totally culturally shocking. What happened is that counterculture won. It is now the mainstream culture. That is not the counterculture anymore. In fact, nowadays the counterculture is a right-wing counterculture, but it's not linked to music in any way. There's no cultural ambassadors for that force. They're mostly outside of, you know, internet trolls. So as a result, kind of, and this has nothing really to do with technology in the end, music itself kind of spent itself as a radical cultural force and is now primarily kind of a commercial enterprise, one that's kind of predictable and tame, despite the fact that they now have a suite of digital tools available to them that was never there before. So, yeah, in my opinion, it's not as meaningful as it used to be, but that's not a technology problem. I don't know. What do you think, Rasmus? I
think there is this paradox of popular music because it's specific for popular music, not classical music.
Sure.
But there is this paradox that you have the ideology behind this.
Even classical music peaked over 100 years ago, probably.
Yeah, but I think just the value aspect of it is you on one hand you have an anti-commercial ideology. Mm-hmm. Undergirding what you do, but at the same time, popular music in the form we know it today, and even the big kind of like the masterworks of popular music, they wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't be here if it wasn't because they were produced for a mass market supported by an industry that could see that we have something that might be an artwork, but a work of art, but it's also something that has a commercial market that we can exploit.
Right, that's the irony. The most profitable time to sell a record was also the time of the flourishing of the counterculture. And I guess that leads to sort of the next question is if we disconnected all our streams, and threw all our iPods and iPhones into some kind of bulldozer and pushed those into the dump, and we all went back to kind of the vinyl record economy, would the music improve?
Yeah. That's a good question.
I don't think so.
No. I at some point I don't either, but I think it's something that we should be able to solve. I think this is back to the kind of like the call of the amateur thinking, right?
Right.
That if we just give everyone the ability to kind of live out their artistic dream, then in sum we will all produce something that is more worth than if we were just only allowing a few people to do that.
Well, how many of you guys collect vinyl records now? 4 up front. You guys don't. I don't, and he does not. No. We really wanted to have a representative of kind of defending physical media up here, but neither of us are that person, so we can't quite debate it. We were supposed to have another guy, but he got the flu coincidentally at the exact same time Depeche Mode was playing, so he got the Depeche Mode flu, which is going around. But I think the attachment to physical media is more of a sentimental one, and it's a kind of patronage for the artist. But I think, as I think about this as a book author, okay, Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, proposed this scheme whereby we'd all get ebook readers, and then rather than buying books, we'd move to a streaming economy where you'd only pay as a reader for what you actually read in the book. And there was huge pushback from the various authors guilds, and especially including me, because that would be an economic disaster for all writers if we moved from the book to the kind of streamed text. And the reason for that is the dirty little secret of the publishing industry and of libraries in general is that most of what gets sold never gets read. People buy my book, they read the first 30 pages, and I designed my book to be very readable, but they read the first 30 pages or they don't even open it at all, and I still get paid, okay? And that's the way the recording industry used to work. There was a lot of dead weight loss. You could sell an album that had like one hit on it, like Ice Ice Baby, Vanilla Ice. He sold something like 10 million albums, $14 albums with 11 songs on them worldwide. And the rest of that stuff was just, dead weight. No one ever listened to it, but he still got paid for making it. The move to streaming made that go away. It was a more efficient solution for the consumer, but it seems like probably it was bad for the artist. What do you think?
Yeah, at some point, yes, it's bad for the artist, but it also creates space for niches that would usually not be part of the market.
Okay.
So we have this transition. I know we can laugh a little bit at music streaming services advertising that they have so many million different tracks, and we know that a significant portion of it has never ever been streamed by audiences.
Right.
But still, we go from a situation where in the CD era, the largest Danish retailer of CDs, Fona, which is now bankrupt.
It's now a parking lot.
They had 20,000 unique titles in their catalog.
Right.
Not in the store, but just in the catalog available to order. And now we have more than 30 million tracks available. I know it's not the same because it's from albums to tracks, but
so
it's
let's say
about
5 million. It's a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. It's still a lot more music available to people now, and people actually they take advantage of that. In Denmark alone, we have 1 million unique tracks streamed on a daily basis on music streaming services.
Right.
And we are only 5.5 million people.
Right.
So people take advantage of this and listen to all kinds of different music. And I think from that perspective, we are moving on and we are getting something, maybe not better, but at least something different. And
this shift creates a new kind of power for a certain kind of cultural programmer. We talked about this before. My belief was that, okay, so you used to have a DJ at a radio station play your track to make it popular. Now what you need is either a playlist editor at Spotify or some kind of neural network that's selecting songs that it thinks you like. That's the new DJ. Those channels were always there, but where you really see the decline in influence as a cultural programmer is for writers about music, music critics. It used to be you had to pay to go listen to music. If you wanted to listen to all the new releases that week, you had to pay something like $200 or $300 to buy all the CDs. So you needed somebody who had a budget to do that, to go listen to all of them and then tell you which ones were good, right? That gatekeeper is gone. We don't need that person anymore. And as a result, there's been sort of a crisis of music criticism. And music criticism went from really being kind of more, almost kind of these, not necessarily heroic, but maybe respected literary figures, at least in English, like Greil Marcus and others, to being kind of the pitchfork mode where it was all about posturing and kind of posing to like a certain thing, because everything was available to anybody. So then, in an environment like that, just kind of choosing is what's important. I don't know. What do you think?
I think you're right, but I think that role has been now taken on not only by artificial intelligence and algorithms, but also by editors at entities like Spotify, where you have people actually choosing music, putting it on playlists, curating it. But I think the huge issue that I have with that.
Will one of these guys take a bribe, do you think, if I wanted to get my song on there?
Well, they say they don't take a bribe, but if you ask...
That's what the DJs used to say, too. Until they busted them taking bribes.
But I don't even think they need to take a bribe.
Why?
Because they are partially owned by some of the record labels.
That's true.
And they have a vested interest in promoting artists that would also appeal to consumers, and that have a kind of like a more long-term career goal. So they want to break artists through these playlists, and there is a great opportunity for a greater chance that the artists will break if they're on a major label that has that artist as a priority. Right. So I think that just having a major label plugging a new track would make it more likely to be on that. Apart from that, you also have record labels as buyers of advertising within the music streaming service, on the ad service.
Right.
So, and I mean, that's not direct bribing, but
right.
You always want to kind of like not bite the hand that's feeding you, right?
Yeah. Rasmus has seen something very interesting, which is the internal kind of data on what actually gets streamed. It's hard to get your hands on. I guess as an academic, you can probably get away with it somehow. So is there anything else that you saw in that data that jumped out at you?
I think what was interesting to me was that the artists that were most popular were not the artists that I thought was the most popular. So you have spikes on the charts with not your major international artists, but someone that have a smaller hit underneath that. The major artists are there, but they're placed further down the chart on a short-term basis.
Right.
But what differentiates the major artists from the kind of like the one-hit wonders is that the major artists, they stay there. Okay. So instead of making a huge amount of money on a short term right after they release the new music, what they do is they make their money on a long term, on years and years after the release of their music, so they keep accumulating money. That's a huge shift in the way we see revenue flowing to the artists.
One of the things I think is that having access to this kind of infinite on-demand streamable library actually degrades your critical faculties a little bit. We were talking about this before, how the internet is becoming ubiquitous. It's becoming like electricity or running water or a sewer system. And what that means is that it becomes a seamless part of your life and you never ever think about it, where it comes from or what it is. You know, where does electricity come from? Well, it comes from that hole in the wall, right? That's where it comes from. And where's the internet come from? It's in the air somewhere. So you take it for granted and it becomes a kind of seamless part of your life, and then it becomes devalued. So that's happening with data streams. And music now is a data stream. And so I think we're devaluing music a little bit too. I talked about this earlier. There's an economist I like named Tyler Cohen who pointed out that we now have access to kind of chess computers that are just, they're the best chess computers. They'll always tell you the right move. But if you tried to learn to play chess by every move you made, you just consulted the chess computer, what is the best move, you would actually learn nothing. You would not understand the game in any way at all, and you would be a bad chess player. I mean, you would win every game, but you wouldn't understand anything about what was happening. You'd sort of be just a mechanical conveyor of information. My belief is that's kind of happening with people's critical faculties when it comes to artistic appreciation of music. Because they always have access to everything, they never get caught in a backwater like I did when I was a kid, where when I was a kid I listened to a bunch of crap, but it was just the stuff that was available to me. So in fact, the experience of kind of getting caught in an aesthetic backwater for a while, I would say was actually good for my development. I needed that to kind of understand what was good and bad and to develop taste. Now you don't have that. You can always ask the computer what's the best thing to listen to, and it'll give you a great answer. But then you're just having information fed to you. Do you agree with that point?
Yeah, I do to a certain extent, but we also need to say that just like you, when you were growing up, people have critical senses, and they get fed a lot of music that is boring or not high quality,
right.
But they also, it's easier for them to dismiss that music because they haven't paid a sum up front for bringing home the record in order to be able to find out that it was crap.
Right.
So it's easier to move on in both the positive and negative sense, but it's because it's also easier to listen to a good song and then forget all about it because you didn't bookmark it when you when you heard it, and then it's gone.
You know what happens is it just, in my experience, it just washes over you. Like in fact, you could queue up a playlist that was years and years long that only consisted of great, like groundbreaking music, but then it would be like eating a 5-star meal every night. You would just get sick of it. You would just get used to it to a certain extent. So I wonder if that isn't kind of a, whatever the word, embarrassment of riches. You know, you just become accustomed to it, and so the value of the artistic output declines.
So what you're saying is that
when
that happens, it's like when you bought that album, you also had an investment into trying to get to know the music before you dismissed it.
Right, that's true also. You also would work to acquire the taste of the artist you listen to because it's all you had access to. I don't think that happens now.
No. I agree on that. No. That's definitely a huge issue about the sheer availability and the numbers of different tracks out there, the many choices we have to take in order to be able to get through this. I mean, growing up and going to the record store, there was an actual you were able to listen to all the music in the record store.
That's right.
If you wanted to invest the time,
and you were able to talk to all the
that,
snobs who hung out at the record store, and they told you what to listen to, right? They're like, "Oh, this is good," or "This is bad." You know, those snobs. We're all that snob now. We've all become record store snobs as a result of kind of total access to everything.
But I think that talks back to a way of educating listeners to be able to navigate the new landscape, new music media landscape, being able to find out how do you use this, because music streaming can be equivalent to your top 40 radio if you wanted to.
Right.
It could be equivalent to your genre radio if you want that. It can be where you listen to it could be a mixtape, right, or your party playlist, or so it can be a lot of different things. And I think we're not at this point. We just talk about music streaming as music streaming, but it's actually a lot of different functions that used to be taken up by different media, right, that are now flowing through the same channel. And we need, as consumers, we need to be aware of that and start using it and understanding it as something that has different possibilities, different affordances.
I mean, there's definitely no going back, right? Like I said at the beginning, no one's going back to purely vinyl. Even the most dedicated vinyl collectors, if you really pressed them and said, well, you got to give up your vinyl collection or give up all streaming music, I think most of them in the end, even though they would begrudgingly do it, would give up their vinyl collections. And this is kind of the thing I was talking about a little bit earlier. You know, there's a trade-off always in music between fidelity and physical media and then the ability to bring it around everywhere. And if you give consumers the choice between like a perfect acoustic cave with $1,000 speakers and the ability to run in the park and listen to it on headphones, they'll always choose the headphones. It's just a superior solution. It's what people have actually want. So the kind of soundtrack effect where every part of your life now has a musical background is really a relatively new phenomenon. And then what's really new about it is that it's always good. You know, you don't have to bring your case of CDs with you to kind of, you know, listen to when you go on a road trip. It's all there more or less instantly. I guess I'd put the question to the audience. Do you guys feel that the music of today is superior to the music of the past? There's the music. Oh, let me ask this. Okay, how many people feel that the music of the past is better than the music of today? No one.
Yes and no.
Yes, one yes. Two yeses. Okay. Does anyone feel it's about the same? How many people feel like there's no noticeable decline in quality? We continue at the same level. Pop music. Yeah, the way it sounds, the artistic value, the songwriting, the performance. Do you think that this is a better era than the old era? No. No. I've asked this question a lot, and I've only had one person ever say that they thought today's music was better than the music of like the 60s and 70s. So I asked an audience of 300 people, and one person thought that. So I think there is, the fact that nobody, even young people, are willing to say, yeah, the music's definitely better today than it used to be, is telling, right? It tells you that we're not living really in a kind of commercial golden age.
But I'd like to challenge that.
Okay.
Because
yeah, jump in.
Do you want to go first?
All right.
Yeah.
I experienced that there's a lot more better musicians today, more of them than before.
Okay.
Because I remember in the 70s, it was amazing just that you played. I mean, but now you can go and listen to fantastic musicians all over.
So he says there's more musicians today, and you can find better musicians all over. Whereas in the old days, it was a relatively limited commodity. And I think that's true. But I compare it to, say, the history of like novelists. There's far more novelists than there are today than there were in, say, kind of the peak of the early modernist movement of the late 19th and early 20th century. But those guys were better. They were better novelists. They were the pioneers. So the fact that there's more doesn't necessarily mean that the value of the artistic quality is better.
I think if I can get to the challenge,
sure,
is that when we understand what happened decades ago, we tend to forget about the things that were really crappy. So we tend to say the music of the 60s and then we forget that if we had to boil down the music of the 90s or the music of the 2000s, that would be only boiled down to a couple of artists. We remember all of the different waves and tendencies that were present in the last 10 years, but we forget that there were that there were also people releasing music that was just not worth listening to in that period.
Yeah.
So you disagree, I think.
Good question.
It was about the question before, I think, about music being better today. I think in some points you can say that some music is better because, like you said, there were less people who were actually able to play, and I think today, because of there's so much, it's so hard to actually be able to earn money. You have to be really, really, really good at what you do, and a lot of musicians know that they have to be like really focused and really, really, really good at what they do to actually get out there, because there's so much more, so many more musicians.
He says the relative, it's supply and demand, essentially. There's such a huge supply. He says there's a huge supply of talented musicians, and that actually makes it harder to succeed because there's too many people competing for a shrinking pool of money. I think it's true. Let me make a funny analogy. First of all, artistic golden ages are real. There are certain times and places in the history of humanity where there has been a flourishing of creative energy. And it is false to assume that that is a permanent condition or that that is always happening. As we look to the past, there are times in history where just clearly stuff got a lot better, and also times where, both in art and music and writing, stuff got a lot worse. I don't think we're living in a particularly good age of music. I don't think we're living in a particularly good age of cinema either. I think that's pretty obvious. But let me just complete my point, and I'll get to Lars. The one art form that I can definitely say without any question is currently the best content being produced today, is the best content ever produced, is pornography. The pornography of today is so much better than any pornography ever produced anywhere at any time, and that has to do with a kind of collision of artistic, not really artistic, but cultural norms changing, colliding with a new technology and methods of distribution and production. But that's not happening in music. That's not happening in movies. And so I think if you look at cinema from the 70s, I think it's better. I think it's better than it is today. And I think it's true for music too. But I could be wrong, and it's a question of personal taste. Lars?
And we could do the same thing tomorrow about porn.
About what?
Porn.
Porn, yeah. Well, we got a big audience then, yeah.
No, actually, in Copenhagen these days, or the last maybe 5 years, has been really fantastic.
Okay.
Compared to every other,
Yeah, I think music. Lars says that music over the past 5 years has been fantastic in Copenhagen. I have noticed this too. I actually think we're on an upswing. I maybe shouldn't be so pessimistic. It's a lot better now than it was probably 10 years ago. I think it's still very. Everything still sounds like a Pepsi commercial to me, and often it literally is used in a Pepsi commercial. And I think that's partly what I have a problem with. There's not a lot of kind of challenging cultural energy to it.
But I saw one in the audience reading Simon Reynolds, and he has the idea of, it was you. It's not that book, but the Retromania book. Yeah.
Rip it up and start again?
No, but also the idea that everything comes kind of in waves. So you have your mainstream pop era, and then you have something alternative. Right. Be that grunge rock, be that rap, be that whatever comes next. Mm-hmm. But you have these kind of pendulum swings where we go back and forth between them. So maybe it's just being whether you're into the alternative stuff or whether you're into the mainstream pop stuff.
Well, see, this is one thing I've noticed. I find that distinction to have been destroyed in the era of streaming, and that used to be a big distinction. The distinction between kind of whether you were a mainstream kind of pop consumer, or you were more into the alt. You know, we're going to go to the Guns N' Roses concert, or we're going to go see the Pixies. And there was a huge cultural divide between the kind of people who would do those things. And they hated each other, actually. We don't live in that world anymore. It would be easy to both go see Guns N' Roses and the Pixies. And if you said, I like Guns N' Roses and I like the Pixies, nobody would be like, that's so weird, or you're so phony, or something. But they would have in the 90s. Because you had to actually make an investment to be, like with money, to be into those bands. And now you don't. So there's been a kind of homogenization of the subcultures. They've all been absorbed into one weird blob-like mainstream culture where everybody kind of approves of what everybody else is doing.
But can I ask you just as a follow-up on that, because you said that you think music is becoming worse. Are music listeners becoming worse too? Are they being less discriminate about what they're listening to?
Yeah, I think they're less demanding. Well, I mean, this is the thing. It's the chess computer problem. Like, because you're fed everything, and everything is great. You know, you're fed the greatest hits of all time just in a continuous stream that you can turn on at any time. It doesn't make you appreciate it anymore, right? It actually makes you devalue it. And so I think the kind of critical faculty or aesthetic that you would have to develop to really say, hey, this is new or different, or I like this, or I don't like this, and here's why, is actually just kind of buried in this wash, this stream, you know? I see it a lot on Instagram too, which is kind of the kind of prime mode of communication for the upcoming generation. You know, a like on Instagram is a like on Instagram. There's kind of small Instagram countercultures, but in the end, everyone's just shilling for popularity, you know? I don't know, and so it kind of feels like musicians are doing the same thing. Which in my opinion is not a great way to create valuable kind of artistic product.
So there's a question out here.
I think I disagree with you. I think there are a lot of musicians out there now that are really trying to be innovative and trying to do what others aren't doing. Maybe it's mainly in Copenhagen right now, but I think the diversity between bands is huge, and it's never been like this before. I think before there were definitely more bands trying to do what's going on at the moment and what everyone else were doing. But I think right now, a lot of bands are trying to do what everyone else.
This is the second person who's told me there's an artistic renaissance happening in Copenhagen right now. I didn't know about this. I got to check it out. I should hang out. Okay, I think we've sort of reached the end of the prepared remarks of the debate, unless you had anything to add.
I don't think right now.
All right, so does anyone have any questions or comments or insults?
What will the future bring?
What will the future bring? I'm going to let Rasmus answer that.
I think, no, I'm seeing a positive future because what we see with the transition to music streaming and with the development that we see music streaming going through right now, I think we can expect an economical growth in the recording industry at a general level. Now that doesn't necessarily translate into more money to the individual musician, because we have an increased diversity in what people listen to, and therefore also an increased competition among musicians. So more musicians will have to share the money. So I think in financial terms, musicians will not be better off, but record labels will be better off. And hopefully what they do, that's what I see right now, is that they're moving towards a situation where they're investing in new music again. From signing only few Danish artists when it was worse, now they're actually signing new artists, and they're putting money into buying them studio time, helping them develop their music, and also helping push it out to an audience. So I think hopefully we'll see more investment in development of new music, and with all of the creativity that the democratization of production brings to it. That is, that if you have a dream of doing music that is outside a record label sphere, then you can do it yourself and you can still get it out there. So I think we're actually moving towards a period now where we see a swing and we get more creativity, but also more investment into producing something that can be bigger than just a good thought, something that could be a good thought plus investment from someone great.
I agree with this point. I think that there's money to be made for the first time in a long time after just the total bottoming out of the late 2000s. I think, relatively speaking, it's going to be a more profitable industry. I don't think it will approach the profitability that it had during the peak of the CD boom in the 90s, but they were making way too much anyway. They were over-earning. So, I mean, you paid $14 for those things, and then it was like a bunch of Vanilla Ice songs, get out of here. So thankfully, we're not in that mode anymore. But I think you're right economically. I guess the question will be, does that mean actually that the music will get better, or that it will return to its kind of heyday of glory as this countercultural force? And I just don't think that the cultural forces, like I said before, it was the vanguard of the left-wing counterculture, and that's what, in so many ways, that just gave it so much magic. It really transformed kind of cultural norms in our society. And now we live the left-wing counterculture is the mainstream counterculture. It's the right wing who has kind of this dangerous counterculture that threatens societal norms. But they don't have any musicians of any quality associated with it. So I can see it returning to profitability as a commercial force, and I can see artists continuing to do, interesting experimental things, new forms of music, new styles. But I don't know if it's easy for it to recapture the magic, I guess.
I have a comment or like a question. Don't you think it's a problem that the streaming services give so little money to the artists? I think it's a problem that there's a problem lying there. So it doesn't give the more musicians the opportunity to actually make some bucks.
I'd say the huge problem is the devaluation of what you call the devaluation of music, because actually what we see is not a situation where the streaming services is keeping an amount that is too high. Actually, the streaming services, they're keeping 30% of the revenues, and everything else is paid out to rights holders. And that's more than what happened in the CD era. So out of your 150 Danish kroner for a CD in a store here, it was not 30% going to the rights holders.
Does Spotify really do that?
They do that, but they push it out to the record label, and then the record label distribute the money from there to the rights holders. Actually, they probably pay out a little bit more than 30% because they had...
Okay, but wasn't that a problem before?
That was also a problem before, but the reason why artists are not making money right now is not because Spotify is keeping the money. It's because people are listening to so much different music. So it used to be that if you had a record label deal and you got your CD out on a record label, then there was kind of a good possibility that you would be able to make money from your release, because the competition was not that big. You had a gatekeeper keeping a lot of people out of the market. Now everyone has access to the market. That means that everyone is competing for the attention of the users. So in that sense, it's a very democratic solution, but it's also a solution that makes it harder for the artists to earn any money.
There's a great scene in the documentary about the Eagles, which I highly recommend you watch, even if, like me, you don't really care much for the Eagles. Just if you want to have any understanding of how the music business functioned back then, where they're talking to Joe Walsh, and he's like, yeah, we put out our greatest hits album, and it became the best-selling American album of all time. And we all hated each other. The Eagles were all fighting with each other. It was like a bunch of egomaniacs in a room trying to make music, and they couldn't get anything done. And the record labels, you have to put out anything, and it's guaranteed to sell at least 5 million copies. And Joe Walsh was like, we could have put a record of us farting into the microphone for 5 hours, and they would have put that out, and it would have sold 5 million albums, because there was no way to know that it was bad until you bought it, and there was a brand association with the music. That's not true anymore. The record company doesn't have the power to do what they did in the 70s, where you could just put something schlock branded with the word Eagles on it and it would sell no matter what based on the legacy. And so that is actually good for the consumer. You don't get burned so much anymore, but it makes the label less profitable and the artist makes less money. Yeah?
How about vinyl sales? I know you're not collectors, but what will vinyl sales be like in 5 and 10 years?
You would know better than me. I don't, like I said, I don't understand the appeal of vinyl. I don't like old stuff. I think it smells bad.
Can I say I think it's maybe a rebellion against all this streaming service.
Oh, it's definitely a rebellion. It's partly a rebellion. It's also partly in kind of a fetish for antiques. I don't know anybody who just listens to vinyl. It's a complementary thing to the current world.
It's not about antiques for me. It's about less is more. I would rather own 1,000 vinyl albums than having access to 40 million tracks on Spotify and go deep into those 1,000 records.
I don't believe you.
So, but that's true.
You'd rather have.
I skipped Spotify.
You skip. You're not a streamer at all.
No, YouTube once in a while, but
Okay.
it's cassettes and it's vinyl.
Cassettes
and
and vinyl.
CDs again.
Okay, so Lars is going kind of back to the past. He's deliberately.
No. I'm going back to less. Not to the
less
past,
is more.
to less.
Well, how? Okay, first of all, 1,000 vinyl albums. That's a lot of space in your house. You know, it's heavy, literally. It's beautiful. Okay.
I think that's actually part of the appeal is also that when I have my phone with my streaming service and my white earbuds,
Yeah.
that there's zero personality in that. So if I want to express to myself and my surroundings who am I, having a record collection, just having a record collection tells people something about, well, it's a record collection, it's not a book collection or a movie collection, it's a record collection, so I'm that kind of type. And if people go and browse through it, they learn a lot about who am I. They can learn my political tendencies, they can learn a lot about, am I a beer guy or a red wine guy,
Right.
or, and all these kind of things. So there's definitely something about identity with it, but I think it's also about the kind of an investment that you do in music, the kind of saying that I have this music, that this is not any music, it's music that I actually chose and brought home with me, which makes the investment into the music bigger.
He's
But
just
I think
theorizing. He sold all his CDs. He told me. So don't.
I sold all my CDs because so that tells me maybe something about my.
There's that
investment
famous
in
John Waters quote.
But-
The movie director is something like, "If you go to somebody's house and they don't have books on the shelf, don't fuck them." So maybe it's kind of like that. It's kind of a way of signaling the interior design that you're a person of substance. Is that
But-
true?
What I'm saying here is I'm just
I'm very skeptical of this, if that's not
I'm
clear.
referencing other people's research
Let me help him out.
on this.
There's something nice about a cover. You can look at it and like study it for hours. You know?
An album cover. Yeah, the art is fantastic.
It's a physical thing.
Yeah, it is fantastic, and I
So-
mean,
but I think just back to your question, I think the future for vinyl is something that's it's gonna be there because it is a counter to what you see in the mainstream market. So but it's gonna be a niche if it takes over too much. If it actually comes through the news story that turned out to be a hoax. I was a little bit sorry about that, but there was a news story about a year ago that Urban Outfitters was the biggest vinyl seller in the world.
oh,
It turned out to be a hoax.
it's not true. I totally thought it would be.
They were only number 3 on the list.
I think Amazon might be number 1, which is very ironic.
But the idea that if it becomes too mainstream, then some of the appeal will fade away. So as long as it's still a niche thing, it has appeal because it's a way to yourself and to others to show that you're more invested in music.
Right,
than,
and this is
usual.
the other thing that's very important about it is it's a form of merch, right? It's a form of merchandise. It's like owning a band T-shirt. You patronize the band by buying this, and so the artists love it. I can tell with Record Door Stay and all this stuff. It's like, it's the same reason they love selling T-shirts at concert venues. Like, and it's the same reason that we love to wear band T-shirts. It is a form of signaling. So from that perspective, I certainly understand it.
The question was just, it's been on my mind for some time now, but now we can talk about it for a little while. But I was just wanting to ask you guys, why do you think the vinyl records have gotten so popular again?
The question is, why have vinyl records gotten so popular? I have no idea. You'd have to ask somebody who buys them. It's baffling to me, to be honest with you.
Okay, let me have one question. What?
Wait. Is it
I want to add then, like maybe the vinyl records have gotten more popular because people are aware that quality is something that you have to pay for, and therefore, like, okay, people are starting to change their mind about music, and then, you know, yeah.
I think actually, if you go to academic research in this, all of the issues that come up today that we hear from people here are aspects of it. It's not just one thing, it's the combination of all these kind of aspects that adds up to wanting to support the artist, wanting to show what your musical taste is, wanting higher fidelity, wanting the physical investment into the ritual of playing the music, putting the disc on the turntable, putting the needle in the groove, and so on.
Going offline.
Yeah, and going offline. And well, I have to say, you know, I'm an author. I see my own ebook sales. My ebook sales are going down as my physical book sales actually recapture it. So the ebook phenomenon, they thought, if you'd asked me in 2010, I would have said, yeah, for sure, you know, 10 years from now, all of these shelves will be empty. There will be no books. It'll all be contained in a single streaming device. And I was wrong, and I was even wrong about myself. I thought I would only be reading that stuff, and it turns out that I prefer paper books. It's just a superior reading experience. You don't have people tweeting at you as you're trying to, you know, get to the next page, and yeah, it's the signaling function. Somebody comes over to your house, the books are on the shelf, people like to see it, they talk about it, etc. You look smart, you can fake it, you know.
But I think it's back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, the idea that every media has its own bias towards something.
Right.
And physical books, physical music has a bias towards immersion,
right,
towards doing that and doing that primarily. Whereas digital files, they don't have that.
Right.
They have a bias towards portability, towards easy access,
right,
towards being able to, what we call it, searchability.
And pornography had a tend towards discrete private consumption that the internet absolutely enabled, 100%. So it was probably the pre-existing mode of consumption that made it, and this is also why television improved, I think, a lot, is because already it was something you kind of did at home alone in the dark. And so television as a medium fits that. Movies, which are more of a communal event, don't so well, and certainly music, you know, didn't at all. It was always supposed to be kind of like well lit or dancing with people or whatnot.
But if you go to the vinyl charts, what you see is it's music made for listening.
Yeah.
And not music made for accompanying, doing your chores, doing your homework, or dancing. It's music made for listening that's on the vinyl charts.
That's a good point. It's almost like a form of art installation or something that you sort of experience in like an environment that's serene. I think that makes sense. So maybe that's it. We've solved it.
Will there come some new medias like for music, or it's just like streaming forever now?
It's definitely not music streaming forever. We'll definitely get some kind of new format, but I at this point I can't comprehend what it should be. I mean, people are experimenting all the time, trying to do new things. Now you can remix the track, and you can have the stems of everything, and you can do it in the mix and listen to it as fragments as you want to. But that's not what you want as a music listener. We still want something that's close to what we're experiencing right now. But I think there are definitely innovations on top of that.
I get this question all the time. What's the next big thing? What's the next thing that's going to rival streaming? And I honestly have no idea. I don't see how. Okay, so the original vision for the MP3 was these guys in Germany who looked at the CDs at the mall. This is like in the 80s. And they were like, well, you know, to the record company and to the record store, this looks like inventory. But I'm a computer engineer, and to me, this is just a rack of inefficiently stored data. We should port all the ones and zeros off of these pieces of plastic, put them in a central server somewhere, and stream them over the telephone. And that was the impetus for why they created the MP3 in the first place. It was supposed to be a compression device for a centralized streaming service. This is the 80s. And his vision for it was that you would call in on a telephone, touchpad telephone, to a central kind of library. You'd have a catalog at home of all the songs, like a karaoke machine that you have. You'd punch in the number, you'd hook up the telephone to like a receiver on your stereo, and then it would stream it back out through the speakers, okay? That was 30 years ago. That was his vision. But now we live in that reality. But if you'd ask anybody in 1982, what does the future look like, you'd have almost everybody talking about CDs, and then there's one like German mad scientist talking about hooking up your phone to the speaker. And that was the right guy. So it's very hard to tell, as you look around the landscape, what the next succeeding technology could be, because it's also hard to see how this current state of affairs could be improved upon in any way. You have kind of a ubiquitous you know, environment of music that can literally be summoned from the air with a voice command like a wizard, okay? Like, what else do you want? Like, what is left to add to that?
Sound quality, but that's coming.
I mean, sound quality, but that's just that'll come as broadband improves, right? And sound quality is a marginal improvement. It's not a revolutionary improvement. So, you know, yeah, okay, we'll go to 5G or 6G and then we'll get better sound quality, but everybody can see that coming. The guys who invented the MP3 were actually anatomists originally. They kind of had mapped out the frequency response curve of the human ear. And a CD, without getting hopefully too technical, stores 1 million bits per second of sound information. So 1 million ones or zeros to encode 1 second of sound. And to pipe it through the channel on your phone, they have to compress it considerably. They got to get it down to 96,000. So they have to compress it by over 90%. And the guys who invented it didn't actually think it was possible, but it turned out the ear is very inefficient. It barely works. And so all of this information on the CD is actually almost totally inaudible, and they've done blind listening tests. So the next frontier of that is not the ear itself, but the auditory nerve, which feeds the information from the ear to the brain. The throughput of the auditory nerve is something like 200 bits per second. It's really small. So at least in theory, it would be possible to hook up electrodes directly to the auditory nerve, skip the acoustic environment entirely, and just stimulate the nerve that goes to the brain. And then you could compress music down to about 1% of the current size. And you say, okay, well, that's fucking crazy. But actually, they're already doing it. Because if you're deaf, you get a thing called a cochlear implant, which is the implant here behind your ear. It feeds directly to your auditory nerve. It skips this whole system entirely and just stimulates the electrical signals in your brain. Right now, it's a very primitive system. It's inferior, like vastly inferior to the way the human ear works. But that's not the fault of the microphone. It's just the fault of the precision electrodes that hit the ear nerve. There's only 30,000 nerves that run from the ear to the brain. So at least in theory, you could wire something to each one of those neurons individually. And if you did that and then put the thing on the side of your head, you could actually have superhuman hearing. Not only could you have superhuman hearing, you could stream via like Bluetooth or whatnot, digital information directly to the brain with no speaker at all. So maybe that's the future.
I have an ad. The sound is also a physical movement. You know, the basins.
Yeah, it's true. Like you wouldn't have the subwoofer effect. So you like if you really were into like dance music, you wouldn't feel it in the same way. But a pair of earbuds doesn't produce that. So,
Or put a sock in your bottom.
Maybe. Yeah, we'll have a little thing. Actually, they'll just wire the nerve that goes up the brainstem to make it feel like you're feeling that. You see what I'm saying? I think that's a good place to stop, unless there's any more questions.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.